Starting off in the world of molecular genetics, Dominique Brossard was originally heading for a career in plant biotechnology, and then veered into a more journalistic realm. She's the chairperson or director of the other LSC. We're the Bond Life Sciences Center LSC. She directs the Life Sciences Communication Department at the University of Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, Dominique Brossard.
So basically, what I wanted to talk to you today is, as Jack was mentioning, why do people end up supporting not science? Because I would claim that I think we are making, I like to disagree with people, we may make a mistake when we put all types of scientific innovations in the same basket. So why do people may actually support or fear specific scientific innovation? Why do we have, for example, some people that would be really not condescended, but that is critical of climate deniers, but actually are strongly opposed to genetic engineering as a scientific innovation? How is that possible, though? So political ideology, indeed, as Chris was mentioning, may be explaining a lot of how people feel about science, but doesn't explain everything. And to give you a little bit of my background, indeed, as Jack was saying, I started as a plant geneticist, actually in an agronomical school in France, after I've been raised in South America and traveled the world following my dad in Africa and such, and was always amazed, moving from country to country, to realize that the same issue, if you move to another country, will be perceived extremely different by the group of people that are supposed to think the same way. Affirmative action in France is totally conservative. I met actually one of my best friends on a playground playing with his kid, and we were very fond of each other and chatting. I realized that he thought we should have a quota of minorities that hired in education. I was like, oh my God, this guy is so conservative. Actually, he was very liberal. But from my French perspective, that idea was actually linked to something that was political ideology in one sense. I became interested, therefore, in finding out what makes people fearful or support different things that we assume can put in the same basket. It's a little more complicated than we may feel, and it's actually a lot of things may come into play when you think about that. And coming from the science background, I love science. I thought everybody should believe in science. I thought everybody should be explained how science, functioned. And indeed, I realized that I didn't have much clue why people felt a certain way, so that pushed me to get a PhD. Yes, indeed, a PhD in social science. The thing that's interesting, though, about what we think about science, is most people will find out about scientific innovations in the media, right? Unfortunately, not a lot of people come to great events like that, although I have to say, Jack, that you have quite a big audience that came this morning. That was amazing. And that people don't go to science museums, or those who go are the ones that are already interested in science and don't need to be convinced otherwise as far as how it can help with scientific progress, right? So people go to media, and that's where they find out what's going on. And that's why they're going to get cues about how they should feel about one thing or the other one. So the first thing I would like to think about is, where do they find stuff about scientific innovation? Where do people find that stuff? And second of all, knowing what we know about what they found and how Chris has very well explained how they process things through their emotions and other type of shortcuts, how can we explain those public attitudes? Why do people in Kenya feel differently about GM than the United States or France? Why do people, like in France, love nuclear energy, or at least are used to it, versus you have a much more stronger, attitudes in Germany? So this is something worth thinking about. So the third thing I want to think about is, where do people find out about a new scientific topic? What do you do when you want to find out about something? Google. Yes, you'll get an A. So basically, that's where we start. And actually, a new study by the National Science Foundation, Science Engineering Indicators, replicated that the notion that people indeed go online to find out about science. And that people actually start with, a search engine when they want to find out about something. The second thing that's new, actually, about science communication is that people also can go to blogs. And those blogs very often are not written by what used to be, science writers that are trained to do so, but by people mainly selected, in this case, on the basis of their originality, insight, talent, dedication, passion, and so on. So these people that are there talking about the things that they're interested about. People also find out about scientific topics to new channels that we hadn't thought about before, such as YouTube. And these are the people that are passionate about it, and they're going to care enough to put themselves out there. By the way, check it out. Decode Science put a little video of all of us there, although they didn't explain to us that they would do so. So we don't look as good as we should, but still, check it out. Here we have, this person actually were you here for Bill Nye this morning? Yes, so actually just so we know that professors do that, I will do that with my pointer, because he said that that's why we do. So here, now I'm going to be very good and not do that. So here, this person here is actually a science teacher, high school science teacher, that actually produced a YouTube video that's one of the most viewed videos about climate change, actually. At that time, he had 5 million views. It's called the most terrifying video you've ever seen. He never talks about political ideology. He never talks about do humans produce climate change or not. What he talks about is the risk, potential benefits to not do anything about it, which is what the insurance do. They don't really, predict if floods are going to happen or whatever. Hey, should we insure, whatever? It's a cost and benefit analysis. He does that with video. Excellent communication if you think about it. And I'm going to talk about here this a little more. So people very passionate that actually go to YouTube. 80% of Americans, including adults, that actually go to YouTube to find out about stuff. Think about that medium. And by the way, engineers are getting good at science communication. This is a good news for us that we're concerned about engineers not being good. Here, this is a little video put together by a lab at the University of Pennsylvania that shows quadrators, that generated more than 7 million views. Cosmos had 7 million viewers. So imagine as far as the potential of this kind of medium when you think about it. And basically this video is about very, very tiny planes that can do very cool stuff. And people really like tiny planes that can do very cool stuff. So it got viral, that's the point. Things that can get viral very easily have the potential to actually inform the public. So this is fine and dandy then. So people can go to all those stuff. We know that they go online. There's no new medium that are there to potentially inform them about scientific topics. What happened from our perspective? I do study communication. I really think it's interesting. I know that people may actually end up, on some newspaper site or otherwise, those blogs. So who actually are telling them something about scientific topics? What we know, though, that they used to be those translators of science, and some of you in the room may be actually in those programs that teach you actually to write about science, communicate about it. We call them the trusted translators of science. And those were the people that actually had science columns in the very credible organizations. I mean, you may recognize here Rick Weiss from Washington Post, the New York Times, LA Times, more recently Dan Vargano from USA Today. They're all gone. They're all gone in the sense that there's no more science columns in those newspapers that report with these people. They either went freelance, or they went to think tanks, or they went otherwise. But the traditional conduits to actually talk about scientific innovation in mainstream media are gone. We have new people that are coming here, and those are some of you in the room. Those are people that are actually interested in communicating potentially their passion and otherwise to the public. And however, we're quite not sure yet how this will, translate in a broader dynamics as far as the public is concerned. So science conduits, the traditional one that disappeared, new media, such as YouTube, are really gaining a lot of prominence. And, online social media, that Liz will explain very well later on, will actually are gaining so much prominence that really we cannot deny their importance. If you look at Facebook, for example, and you compare Facebook daily active users in the US here, 126 million active users, to the combined circulation of the 10 largest newspapers here, 8 million, you can see where the power of information resides. If you want to put your buck somewhere to actually, reach people about science, to some extent, we need to stop talking about journalism. We need to begin talking about how we can get the journalists to actually be put in social media so people can see what they write. It's all about how can we make sure that people find the information? How can we make sure that when we search for it, they're going to find it? That's the key, and that's the things that we love to explore in my lab. The type of things that tell us why people find information. And a sign of those changing times when actually mainstream media, either online or print, are really changing is the fact that in 2012, the Pulitzer Prize was given to online-only sources, Huffington Post and Politico Win, and more recently to Inside Climate News, which is a blog. The blog with 7 people, 7 staff members, funded only on donations. Totally a new model for journalism, actually, that is recognized as the potential future of science news. And so what about, social media, right? What happened with social media and the massive potential channels that exist out there? Because we always talk about Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. Let's not forget about all the other ones. And again, I'm not going to say much about it because Liz will talk much better than me, actually, about these issues. But the only thing I want to remember is from the perspective of somebody that wants to find something, there is a commonwealth of information, and I'm actually positive about it. I think this is great. They don't need to go to a science museum anymore. We don't need to actually go to the library to find an encyclopedia. We actually can search and potentially find things with potentially anywhere. With our phones, if we have a good connection. By the way, the connection here is not great, just so you know. So don't Google me right now because you may not find too much things. It's a trap, so the speakers don't get, people asking questions and checking at the same time. So basically, yes, commonwealth of information. So what we are trying to do is trying to understand how that commonwealth of information may actually make people feeling about specific scientific innovation go one way or the other. So there is a new type of science media diet. Yes, we know that. This is the recent data from the Science Engineering Indicators, again, the National Science Foundation, that show that for science and technology here, people tend to actually gravitate towards the internet, the black part here, versus for current news event, they tend to rely much more on mainstream media here. And then for specific scientific issues, they go to internet. Okay, that's why I told you. My common sense was like, hey, they Google. National Science Foundation agree with me. That's good. The second thing that we have to say, though, is that we did try to find out if that was true with sound empirical data at UW-Madison. And what we did a big survey asking people where they found information about specific technologies, and more specifically nanotechnology and stuff they were not really, aware of what it was. So what we did here is that we tried to differentiate people that go to traditional media mix. This is TV or newspapers, either online or offline. 23% of people for new scientific innovation go to that stuff. 1 out of 5 people almost. Only television. Television is still strong in the United States, actually. We shouldn't deny that. 1 out of 5 people would go to television. Newspaper, online, offline, so they're not a mixed diet, just newspaper, not rely on television, 16%. And then here, those are the ones I'm interested about. The ones that go only online, Huffington Post, Politico, Inside Climate News, Wikipedia, and you name it, right? So these people here, they go to online only, and also the traditional media mix, 34% of population. And then those here, the ones that just do the online stuff. They never see a mainstream newspaper, or may actually encounter it but kind of dismiss it. That's not where really they find their news. 7% of the population. So why do we care? I mean, yeah, right, we take care about science and stuff. Well, if you look at the 18 to 34 years old here, you see that 40% of that group, these are the people that are going to vote. These are the people that are going to choose our leaders. These are the people that will have an impact on policy making related to science. These people, 40% of them, go only to online-only sources. So this means that we need to actually try to put our information there, whatever information may be, whatever story we have to tell should be told there. Obviously, when you actually change demographics, you can see very fast that the older people get, the more they rely on traditional media mix. So that's not really a surprise. But the case, though, the point that I want to make is that we do need to keep in mind that really where the game is played is that on online-only sources as far as the population of the generation of adults that we're interested about. All right, so we should put our box to online-only sources. We need to find out what's happening there, and we need to actually understand how people support or reject specific scientific innovation when they encounter information in those contexts. So what do we know, and how do we approach this issue? The first thing that we need to know, though, is that people, individuals, you and I, we actually are complex human beings. We may be, animals in nature, but we're a little bit complicated. So obviously, that's why it's fun to be a social scientist, right? I tell you, coming from a lab where I had test tubes with actually little DNA things, I think it's much more fun to study human beings. They're actually really kind of complex and hard to explain as much as we want, right? So basically, people are concerned about scientific innovations. They're concerned about the potential societal implications. What we did here is compare attitudes toward nuclear energy, nanotechnology, and synthetic biology. For those of you who don't know, synthetic biology is basically applying principles of engineering based on biological systems, constructing things that don't really exist in nature, but can do things that actually do not exist in nature based on biological systems. So here you look at nuclear here, you can see people actually on a scale from 1 to 8 are concerned about, from 1 to 10 actually, are concerned about unintended consequences. It may conflict with some of their moral view. Is it right to do this kind of thing? They conflict with potentially their views of their religious belief, and maybe moving society too fast in a direction that we don't really want. The same question for nano, you can see that actually the morality aspect becomes more important here, and for synthetic biology actually also more important. The point I want to make here is that you have the same trend, but you have differences. So we need to understand those differences, because those differences are important in trying to explain how people, end up feeling about certain issues. Number one, we know that it's not because they don't know enough about the issue, and Chris made that point very well, and I'm going to emphasize what he said here. More information or explaining people what the science is about doesn't do much. As a matter of fact, we know in the case of genetic engineering that the more people know about genetic engineering doesn't mean that the more they will support it, right? French people know a lot about genetic engineering. They hate it. It's because they like their food, you would tell me. So they don't want people to mess with their food. So, but the more people know about something doesn't mean the more they're going to reject it or be against it, because people do not use knowledge to actually come up with attitudes. You and I, we cannot think all the time. We cannot think about what we know. So what we do, we rely on things, pictures we have in our heads, and use them as mental shortcut to make sense of the world around us. That's normal. You see me here with my night ties and my French accent, suddenly you have a mental image in your world. Then I tell you that I'm a professor, it changed your mental image. Then I tell you I know about genetic engineering because I studied it changed your image, and clack, 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 you're gonna use that to actually make sense of what I tell you. You may believe me more or not, but that's what you do, because you cannot be thinking all the time. And those mental shortcuts can be used by, provoked by images here. Here are some images related to GM. If I show you this, I'm sure you have something that comes to your mind. People smile. This doesn't look very cool, right? Just because of that association. Most of us, we don't like to be, the doctor and having these kind of things put in our arms. The second mental shortcut that people have used in the past for genetic engineering is the monarch butterfly because of, unfortunately, my alma mater, big PR mistake related to genetic engineering a while back, where they actually publicized a study that ended up not being as good of a study as we thought, claiming that actually genetic engineering was hurting monarch butterfly. If you don't want to hurt something, don't hurt butterflies. That's not good. People don't like that. As a matter of fact, there's an anti-GM movement that just came out, and they actually use the monarch butterfly as their symbol, which I think is very smart of them, actually. So basically, that's one of the mental shortcuts. And Franklin food, used by Greenpeace, is a very important and nicely chosen frame and mental shortcut because everybody knows what Frankenstein is. You say Franklin food, mental shortcut, bad, right? I could have put positive ones, but the negative ones are almost more fun than the other ones. And media frames can provide those mental shortcuts, and they do very often because remember that people do not go to science centers or anywhere else to try to find out about science. The type of frames that we have through the media can be, for example, the visuals, the metaphors, the sources you use, or the type of people that actually are, representative of a certain, how do you say, tribe, Chris? I thought that was a great word. And that is something that we need to think about. If I show you this image, and again, think of a mental shortcut, and what we know from our research is that the same information shown to different people will be processed differently. You can show the same information, the same story to different people. They're going to react to it differently. You may call it moderated reasoning, I call it perceptual filter, whatever way you want to call it, but that's the reality. If I show you a story about cloning with this image here, show anything small and cute and you have fuzzy feelings, it's a very little kids or little kittens or little dogs, then that's a really have some repercussions. If I show you this picture, and then no offense to people with a beard and glasses in the room, but you don't have the same fuzzy feeling that come through your mind. My point here is the story about cloning will be processed very differently because of the mental shortcut that you associate with whatever frame might be used for that story. And what are frames? Like here it's a very, very simplistic but extremely powerful way to look at it. It's something that gives you a way to actually process information. And in this case, scientific information is complicated for most people. Something about GM, something climate change, or synthetic biology, or nanotechnology. If you don't have a strong attitude about it, you need to make sense of it relatively quick. So if I show you this here, what do you see? Yes, yes, and yes. If I show you this, you have a B. If I show you this, there's a 13. So think in terms of that for mental frames, in terms of, like an image and a media story that's put in that frame. It gives you a way to make sense of it. Oh, I think of cute little babies that may be hurt by cloning. Maybe like nice frame. Oh, I think if the trustworthy scientist that looks like what he's doing with his little tube, gives me a frame. So it makes sense of information. There's nothing wrong about it. And actually, journalists should use frames that resonate with audiences, right? That's what we need to do. Tell stories that people can get. However, remember, I'm a social scientist. I look at patterns. Aggregated, those frames may tell you a story about the scientific innovation. Here, Michael Dahlstrom here talks about meta-narratives to some extent. If you put all those narratives together, what's the big story that comes up? And that's what bothers some. Sometimes those meta-narratives give a story about those innovations that you're not maybe really keen to pursue because they're not be the one that you would like to see. And I told you that people will react different to any given frames and use those perceptual filters. And I agree wholeheartedly with Chris that that may be political ideology, but it depends on the innovation. It can be also religious belief. It can be any moral schema. It can be that you're in Kenya, you do really want people to actually have enough to eat, so that food security will be your moral schema that will make you have a specific attitude toward GM food, for example. It can be anything, and those can be very different from one country to the other, and that's what we've seen in our research in cross-cultural comparison. So low information people, we cannot think all the time. We're not going to think all the time because we don't have time to do so. We're going to make sense of the information through those different filters. And that information can give us those mental shortcuts in different ways. Scientific information can be very boring, right? But then you encounter in places where you like it. And this can be through those frames that give you a way to make sense of it. It can be through what I call cultivation, and I won't elaborate because Barbara Klein-Pope will do it extremely well later on, which is that those big images that we have in entertainment media again and again and again. When we begin thinking that that reality of entertainment media is actually the truth about the world. It could be CSI, but it could be the Big Bang Theory. I'm no offense, social misfit. I don't know if that's what we want people to think about scientists. But that's something that we need to think about. And it can be also any type of public opinion dynamics that I won't get into it, but there's a lot of them that could be relevant. So what impact people's attitude towards scientific information are a lot of things. I'm not going to get into the detail. I told you France reacts very differently to nuclear energy, broadly, at the societal level, because, people have, most likely, a nuclear power plant 3 miles from their house, wherever they live. And they actually see it every day, and it's normal, and that's the way you feel about it. That's a cultural, social political context that you may be used to, which doesn't mean that some minorities may not feel that way. It depends on the information climate, the overall meta-narrative about a specific information, about the technologies, and those individual level characteristics that I was telling you about, which, if I was really, really boring, I would go and explain in details. Because we have models, and we have studies and studies and studies that show that all those things matter, all right? Explaining how people feel about information, about different type of technology. I'm just going to say a word about the 3 last ones. And Chris alluded to trust, and I think it's important to think about it. What we know from social psychology, it's acceptance of a message really depends much more to the perceived trustworthiness of the messenger than the content itself. If I'm here standing and you hate me, or you don't think I'm not credible, and you don't think I'm not trustworthy, I can tell you whatever I want. You're not going to believe me. However, if there is some trust that's built and you actually think I'm trustworthy, then you're going to actually pay more close attention to the content. That's normal. That's the way we do it. Oh, I had forgotten the last part of the sentence. Sorry about that. And what we know from our research on nano and other type of innovations is that university scientists come up to be the most trusted source of information. When you ask people, how much do you trust these people to give you information about different technologies, scientists come very high, and that's across political ideologies, and we're talking about nanotechnology. Maybe different for climate change, maybe different for other things, but for new scientific innovation, certainly that's the trusted sources. News media doesn't do so well. You can see that political groups, Congress here doesn't do well at all. White House been here. But I think it's good news for scientists. And this actually is the same data, I think, that you use, Chris, but I think we need to think for trust in relative terms. To some extent, okay, conservatives trust less science than liberals. But what we want to know is relative to other institutions, who do people trust as an institution? And consistently, science is actually outperforming other institutions. Here you have science as the white graph, percent of people that had a great deal of confidence in the people running the following institution. And I talked about deference to scientific authority, which is a strong belief that scientists know what they're doing and that they can help scientific process. You know, something that we learn in school, basically, something that Bill Nye tells us, like scientific method, this is good, scientists know what they're doing. And when we ask people about different attitudes toward different technology, again, nuclear energy, nanotech, synthetic biology, you can see that political ideology doesn't always play a role. So what we do here is we're trying to see why people would perceive more risk or less risk in those technologies. For nuclear energy, what explains their attitudes is the scientific deference, how much they actually believe in science as helping society to some extent. And that trumps, other type of influence. Here you have actually perceived knowledge and political ideology that plays a role, with Republican being, a Democrat actually seeing less risk. However, for nano and synthetic biology, political ideology disappears. And what explains how people feel about those technologies really is here, you can see religiosity, moral values, and, potentially deference to scientific authority. So that's the thing, and I would agree with Bill Nye on this one, that it's all about cultivating, when people are small, that deference, that actually a strongly held value. So it's not trust. It's just, as an institution that, scientists or science is, helping, society. And again, in the United States, you still have that. That's actually something important to think about. So I'm just going to quickly finish with talking about like online media here. Something that we haven't thought about is that notion of social norm. And I don't know how much time I have left. Yeah? Nobody knows. This is great. Aren't you happy you're going to have me here for 2 hours? Social norms basically is that idea. Another shortcut that we get is like, what are other people, 5 minutes? Other people, how do they feel about, whatever we're thinking about? We're social animals. We monitor our environment. That's why political campaigns go and put little signs in people's front yards, right? Suddenly you're surrounded with all those signs, like, oh my God, everybody thinks not like me, I'm not going to say anything. Social norms, extremely powerful. We are social animals. And one study that we did is like we looked at YouTube, I love YouTube, and we actually manipulated the number of views in their video that I really like. Remember about the most terrifying video you would never see with that science teacher? And we showed a random group of people that part of that video with a large number of views and another group of people with a few views. And what we found, that actually number of YouTube views matter. What a letdown, right? Well, no, actually. People that saw the video with a lot of views tend to think that the issue of climate change was very important to Americans, compared to people who saw the video with 700 views. Like, yeah, no, that's very important. Basically, people had that shortcut in extrapolating who these people that viewed it a lot and that they were representing the American population. Obviously, they're not, right? So, but talking about potentially manipulating, an online environment to have people that think a certain way. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the other cues that are provided online that we never really think about. The number of comments. We see a story, there are comments. We see the most emailed studies. We see the stories. We see the number of tweeters, retweets, and things like that. And we call that contextual information. And for example, in blogs, I think very good blog posts by very good science writers, will have often comments that can convey uncertainty, a lot of emotions, fear, hope, disagreement, and name-calling. Name-calling, people being very rude, those evil trolls, right? That actually are evil there, like telling us that we don't know what we're doing. So basically, this really, potentially can impact how people feel. And that's another study we did and we published last year, where we show exactly the same story to a random number of the American population, but half of them saw rude comments, and the other half saw actually polite comments. Exactly the same story. And you know what happened? The one that saw the rude comments ended up thinking that the story was more biased. Same story, just the comments were rude. And things very simple, like idiot, like things like that. I know people make fun when I say idiot. Sorry for my French accent here. It's like, idiot. I didn't do well here. So basically, yes, indeed. And so the New York Times thought it was really funny, and so they actually asked us to write an editorial about that story, that study, and they call it "The Story Stinks," which, well, that's their headline. But apparently that was good. And the idea that, and we got tons of comments. But the funny thing about those comments is that the first newspaper that actually talked about this study was the journal Sentinel, that one of the major newspapers in Wisconsin, print version. And then in the online versions, online comments, heard science understanding, study find, with a lot of comments, all right? And those comments were actually very interesting. They told us basically that we were reptilian overlords. And that, we were pointed-headed scientists, 99% of us, socialists and communists, or etc. This actually, the irony of the whole thing wasn't lost, on The Onion. You know The Onion? Right. So they wrote, awful online comments hurt understanding of news, reports local news site filled with awful comments. Yeah, and so, this is food for thought. I wonder what people got about the story about that study, though. Did they get it, or we want to do a study about the study about the study? That would be really interesting. Anyway, just to conclude, though, we were happy because this got reported first in the science news realm, but ended up generating a very broad conversation in a lot of media online, and actually suscitated an extremely important debate. Why do we have comments? Why do we have comments? What do we expect from comments? Do we want people to understand better our stories that we put out there? What's the goal? Do we need to moderate it? Why? How? What's the point of the whole thing? So I think this is important to keep in mind. However, particularly since Popular Science, a magazine, actually ended up shutting off their comments, in part arguing that because of our study, we generated a lot of comments against us again. So it's a whole common thing. But anyway, all this, why am I telling you all those stories? So what, you will tell me? Because we should care. We should care about this. Why? Because, first of all, all science that's out there, I'm not talking about science, I'm talking about scientific innovations, are very complicated. And there is a lot of ethical, legal, and social issues. Synthetic biology is a really good example. And the problem with these studies is it goes faster to society than actually society can formulate potential policy regulations that actually can regulate the ethical, social, and legal aspect of it. So food for thought. Let's think about online. Let's think about the power of cultivation, as my colleagues here will tell you. Thank you.
I was wondering, since programs like yours specifically teach students how to communicate about science, if you think that journalists with maybe less science knowledge as those students can communicate just as effectively.
That's an interesting question that people in the honors program of Decoding ask us. I'm going to tell you something that's, I think, is going to be something you can keep with you all your life. There's really good scientists, bad scientists. There's really good human beings, bad humans. There's really good journalists, bad journalists. It's all about doing well your job. There's really bad science journalists, and there are really good science journalists. The fact that you're trained in something doesn't mean you're good. So in short, yes, of course. I think the idea is really to actually do whatever you are trying to do well, but by understanding, though, what are the potential, shortcuts or differences that rely on the topic you're covering. So if you get something out of my talk here and say, hey, I need to know my audience. I'm going to write my stories knowing that people use mental shortcuts. And I know from that wonderful talk I heard at Decode Science that those shortcuts are going to be very different depending on the innovation I'm covering in my story. And you understand that, and you think in terms of those frames, then you're going to be okay. I believe in you.
Thank you.
I have a question. And what advice do you have in recognizing people's filters and using our knowledge of their filters to better communicate with them?
There's two things that are interesting in here. Actually, people are open to understanding that notion of perceptual filter. Again, I mean, I'm a professor, maybe like students are forced to listen to me, but I taught a class on communicating controversial science, and I had, Wisconsin, we have very conservative people, particularly my college, the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. A lot of students come from farming background, like strong conservative values and such, and a lot of those students came to me afterwards saying, hey, you know what, actually now I understand better why I feel the way I feel about issues. And then the idea would be, if you communicate, is to actually not try to argue on those grounds. Because if somebody, it's against embryonic stem cell research based on their moral values, explaining to them why the technology is good may not actually be the most effective way. However, we know with stem cell that arguing on moral values has been quite effective. If you have somebody that's Nancy Reagan that comes and says, hey, people will die like my husband if we don't invest in that technology. I'm from your political ideologically board, but let's find a way, let's find the rock where we can stand together and find a mutual understanding. So I think, just working on those filters and understanding how they can be used can really be powerful.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you touched on it a little bit, and so we all know that social media like Facebook and Twitter is fast becoming a large part of how my generation gets our information, gets the news. And as scientists, we're told a lot of times that we should have a blog, we should have a Facebook, we should tweet. And I'm all about, increasing, scientist communication with the public and all that, but I do worry that all the tweets and all the Facebook status updates are just contributing to this, ever-amassing amount of just information that's being thrown at everyone, and I just worry that it's contributing to sort of misunderstanding and just contributing to the large amount of information out there. Should scientists be on social media, or will that be harmful, do you think, to the public?
So, in a nutshell, good for you for worrying. And I hope a lot of the scientists that do want to be, very active, communicate and worry. That's the first step. That if you're going to do it, you know why, what's your goal, and that you want to do it well. So should scientists be in social media? Actually, I just wrote an editorial about that. Actually, I think, why not? As long as they know what they're doing. And that actually, as long as they understand, and potentially they may have, some consequences that they hadn't thought about. And so I think that indeed, communicating and be ready to do so is important, but Liz will tell you much more than me about all that stuff. So pay close attention to what she has to say. Because Liz Neely is going to just talk about that, communicating science on social media and how scientists can actually take advantage of it.
Great, thank you.
I heard you briefly mentioned Wikipedia, which I'm very glad to hear that because I happen to edit Wikipedia. I've
right?
heard some other speakers mention it this week as well. I just wondered if you thought that the knowledge value of Wikipedia was a net gain, even with all the disinformation that is contained.
So to some extent, that's a very good point. I'm glad you raised all those questions, all of you. One thing is that Wikipedia is here. Number two, whenever you search something, Wikipedia comes up. So we need to deal with it. People will go and look for it. So, but we do have, I think, ethical obligation, all of us, to go and edit whatever we know about anything. My students, I have a science and social media class, they're constantly editing Wikipedia entries. They're not really happy about it, but then they find it very fun, particularly since they realize that they're editing each other's entries very often. But my point is, though, I think Wikipedia can be a great tool. It can also be used for misinformation, and certainly, it's also a channel for advertisement, right, for corporations and such. But it can also be a great tool. As a matter of fact, there was a call very recently, I think it was in the UK, or in California, there's a big movement right now for women in science to go and put a Wikipedia page, because we have realized that mainly guys are there. I'm part of a mentoring Women in Science board. So, it can have a really good influence too, as long as we know that we can contribute in making it, as accurate as possible.
I don't think you have a Wikipedia bio
I don't.
yet, but I intend to fix that.
Thank you so much.
With scientists being more on media or social media, do you think, or like in science being more on the internet, like all the misinformation, have you ever thought of working with search engines to make it so that the more credible information comes up first?
You know, we actually talked, I can send you some studies that we did actually. We worked a lot on big data and searching algorithms and see what they retrieve and what's happening. And we actually tried to obtain the algorithm from Google. However, as you can see, they told us no. But, you know, the thing though that we can work on, and I was talking about it in the journalism school yesterday, is actually teach people that actually write some, you know, like some tricks of the trade. So if you need to know that whatever you will do, it's irrelevant if people don't find it, right? So you want your thing to be found, and you know you need to learn about keyword optimization. How do you make sure that your thing will come up? How many links do you have to put for your website to come up? All those things, and I think those are critical. So when I'm thinking about, you know, are you communicating online and what channel do you use? You need to know what it means, because there's research in marketing particularly that actually shows how those can come up and things like that. So the trick is, you know, to make sure that the accurate information comes up. In a study about nano and GM, actually, we looked at the most often, the websites that came in the first page. You know, when you Google, research also tells you that people tend to click to the first page. It's very rare that people go and move. You know, you look for something first page. So what we did, we actually extracted all the content from the first pages that came and things like that. And actually, for example, government sites, you know, like such as CDC and stuff, they're never in the first page. They're like, so because they don't use all those technical tricks to be able to ensure that they're there. I was talking to NSF, actually. They want us to work with them to help them generate this kind of attention so people find those pages. So that's a very good point.